All right, so we've reached the end of React, even though I feel like I just taught you the beginning of React yesterday. And we're on to news site number 6. So we've learned quite a bit so far. We talked about class-based and functional-based components. We didn't know anything about state. Now we know a little bit about state. We talked about render and props and component life cycles and passing stuff down from one component into another. And we're going to finish up today with news site number 6. There's 3 high-level objectives. One of them is that we're going to wire up the login page. So yesterday we created a login page. It was just static. It didn't do anything. We're actually going to use that login page today. We're going to have the navigation bar. It's going to either show a login link if you're logged in, if you're not logged in, and if you're logged in, then you have a log out button. And then finally, when we run npm update app today, it's actually going to protect the add an article link, so you can't actually add an article without like a token. So people who are not logged in, who aren't authorized, aren't allowed to actually use your application. So what I've done so far, just to get us started a little bit faster, is that I've cloned down news site 5. I've used Christian's solution, and I've just dragged it into news site number 6. And I've also cloned down number 6, and I ran npm install. Otherwise, we'd be here for half an hour. So this is kind of like when we're talking about single-page applications, this is a little bit of how it works. So you as a user, you go into some sort of login page. You enter your credentials and you hit submit, and it's sent to some sort of service that validates whether or not you are logged in or you're not. Either you're valid or you're not. If you're valid, they return you an access token. So when you sign into like Google, they send you back an access token that says that expires after a certain amount of time. So whenever you make a subsequent request, you send over the access token, which says like it's some sort of unique identifier, a bunch of letters and numbers that are nonsensical to you, but essentially it's like it's attached to this particular user, and it's valid until 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, 2 months from now. So every single request that you make, it's an authenticated request because of that access token that you're sending over. If you make a request to a protected endpoint, like a protected URL, like I can't be able to see my bank account information unless I'm logged in, those require a user token. If it's not included, we're going to return a 401, which is an unauthorized response. So we talked about status codes. We're going to need to memorize those for interviews. So 200 status code is good. 300 is redirect. Yeah. Let me introduce you to my friend. 400 is no, and 500 is yeah, some sort of server error. It's not you. It's me. When you make an API request with some sort of valid token, the expiration is extended again. That's generally speaking why, I think for me, I don't actually have to log into Google maybe like once every 6 weeks or so, once every 4 to 6 weeks, and then it just keeps extending until the very end. And then they will say it's expired and you have to sign in again. They'll send you a new token. So to set this one up, we've got news site number 5. We've just copied and pasted the entire source folder. I don't know if it works because I copied over somebody's. And I'm going to paste it directly in the repo. So I cloned it down, and I just took all of Christian's source file and just threw it right over here. All right, after we copy over the source directory, we're going to run npm run update app. It's a good question. So I'm just going to run this real quick. And I don't know what happens, but if you take a look, if I run update apps, there's a package.json. There's a package.json file, has the name of everything, a bunch of dependencies that you're going to need. If you jump down to scripts, there's an update app. And basically what this is doing, okay, let's see. It says CP, which stands for what? Copy. So I'm copying a file from API temp 6 news articles api.t.js to this file over here, and copy this and copy that. It looks like I'm updating the tests, but instead of having you clone it down and everything, we created a quick script called update app. So it goes inside of here, it goes inside of temp, goes inside of 6. It grabs the new tests that we wrote ourselves, and then it copies it into yours so that you're able to run the tests and make sure that everything runs as expected. All right, so I've run npm update app, and then we're going to install, and we're going to start.
Is that the first time you've done
I think we did it yesterday. Did we do it yesterday or no?
I didn't see it.
We did it as
Okay.
Yay.
Mod. God, okay. All right, so it says failed to compile, and it gives us a reason. Module not found, can't resolve React strap. Any ideas of what we can do to solve this? Yeah, that's all we got to do. So let me kill the server. Npm install React strap.
Do you need bootstrap?
Well, it only said React strap, so I'm gonna assume that it's okay until then. So npm that, and then npm start.
I was on the back.
I
Back in the
was
door. I just thought they said oh, there's about the maintenance. Do one first and then
Oh, right. Oh, wow. This is actually really pretty. Okay, so we got news site 4. We got a nav bar at the very top. Got the add article page. Can I actually do A, B, and C? Unauthorized. Okay, so that's the new thing. So when we did the update app right there, we're only allowing you to actually add an article if you are an authorized user, if you are logged in at all. But we're able to go see all the articles related to opinion, world, national, and business. And I believe that on one point we're supposed to have a search functionality. So let's look for the second one, PRAE. Okay, cool. And if I delete, I get all of them right back. And there's that PRAE as the second one. I think everything operates the way that we're supposed to. If we go to login page, we just have my actual email and password. So let's clear it out to john@code.com. We're going to submit right over there. So we have email john@code.com, password is 123123. So we are capturing the things in there. All right, so let's see. Did we do all this initial setup? We copied everything over. We ran update app. Everything functions as we expect, so we can move on. Sure.
Can you show me where you're capturing the email and the log?
Sure. Let's take a look at that. Sure. So the question for the video was, where is the? Oh no, did I put the right place? All right. So the idea is the question. The question was, where is the login page, and how are we capturing the email and the password? So we all know that the entry point into every single app is app.js. So I'm going to start there. And there's oh my gosh, there's everything. So that we're bringing in a bunch of stuff, but I'm looking specifically for the router right down over here, because it's that page that I'm going to is /login. So I'm looking for the exact path with /login, and it's right down over here on line 22. Once I get to /login, I'm noticing that there's a component called login page. I don't know what that means, so I'm going to go up to the very top. All right, it says import login page from pages login page.js. All right, so it looks like relative to this file, there's a folder called pages right there, and within there, there's a file called login page.js. Double click right over here. This looks like it's a class-based component that has some sort of state in it. So we have state equals email is equal to an empty string, and password is equal to an empty string. There's an on submit, there's an on change. I don't know what any of this means, but if I go down to this React fragment, there's an on change. All I know is that there is an on submit. So I type in all of my information and I hit the submit button, and something happens. So this on submit here goes this.on submit. The idea is I fill out all my stuff and I hit the submit button, and then something happens. When I hit the on submit, it looks like it's part of this particular class, the login page.js class. I'm going to pass in something called on submit. Right? So it looks like it takes in an event because it's an event handler. So when I hit submit, it's actually an event that happens in JavaScript. And I'm going to prevent the default from happening and console log this.state. Okay, so it looks like there's an on change that's a little bit more useful, and it's found down over here. Okay, I see. So he's got an input. Whenever anything changes, that's the on change event, I'm going to fire off this .on change. So every single time that I type something in, it's going to set the state to of e.target.name, e.target.name. So it's event.target.email. So it's going to say email is equal to whatever I typed in, and the second time is password is equal to whatever I typed in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
Could you also do that where you just change the state on the document?
You could do that, yeah. So this is, I mean, do you want to talk through your thought process of why you decided to do it this way? It's not wrong or right. It's just
I don't know. I've been reading through guides, and like it seems like a popular way to do a lot of forms because you can have prompts that say that are based off your input. Like, I guess it's hard to think of things like for the actual password in like username and password entry. Like when you're creating a password by setting state on change, you can say password is not greater than 4 characters. Password does not have 2 special characters. A lot easier when you're changing status and things like that.
Rather than having it go all the way through submit and telling them it's wrong.
What?
Rather than having it go all the way through submit and then to tell them that it's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can tell them reactively as they're typing that
It sounds like you could like,
stuff's wrong. Input's wrong.
as they're typing, say, oh, this isn't valid, this isn't valid. Oh, now it's not so valid. Not so valid.
That's good.
all of these are doing it this way is fine. If you wanted to do it the other way where you're able to just set state directly on submit, that's also okay. And the way that one would look would be I would prevent default from happening, and I do this set state. I believe it's email would be e.target.value at 0 or something like that, or e.target.values.name or something. And then the password would be the second thing in there, e.target.value at 1.
Wait, Chris, I got a question. On your own change method, why is there e-target.name bracket?
So I didn't have to write out both forms at the set state. Like so that function will work for the change state of the email and the password.
He's saying it. I think this all makes sense. The e.target.name is event.target. This is the name portion of the input. But why did you put it in square brackets and not just like that? Other than the fact that there's squiggly lines.
So, because it's an object, and like an object, key name,
Cool. Makes sense. All right, so we've got this login page, and let's take a look. So right now we've only utilized a single type of object model from the API, the article, and today we're going to be dealing with a new model, the user. So if you take a look inside of our source API, before we only had the articles API. This is the stuff that we were using, and then right now we're going to add in something new called the users API. So we've only dealt with things related to the article and articles API, and we're only going to be dealing with things related to the users in the users API. Okay, so as such, let's create an API.js module. It's actually here already. When we ran update app, it actually copied it into our API folder.
So let's say now that you bring it up, I see why you're confused. Like I think when you're using a variable for setting a key pair name like that, I think it needs to be brackets.
It needs to be brackets anyway.
It won't, like when you're using a variable instead of just setting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Basically, when we go back over here, if you would think that you can just do this, but then you can kind of see there's already a squiggly line. It's like, what does that actually mean? And it turns out you do need the square brackets around it in order to substitute it in there at that point. All right, so let's take a look. In the users API.js module, we should create a function called login, which takes a credentials object. The credentials object is the parameter that's being passed in, as you can see right over here. And the structure should look something like this. It's going to have it's just going to be an object with the email and the password. Currently, right now, the way that the API is set up is that there's only one email and one password that will work for today. So it has to be john@doe.com, and the password has to be Open Sesame. But when we start using like Google and we start creating our own users and stuff like that, you can obviously change the email and the password. But for today, the way that we boxed it out, we just have john@doe.com and Open Sesame. We're not trying to teach as much about the login here as more of like, how do we, once we get a response back from the server with an ID token, how do we store that in state, and then how do we keep track of that so that you can only make requests if you're logged in, and how do you conditionally show if-else logic with the logging in and the log out at the very top. So luckily, it says this function should create a request that's almost identical to the articles API add article function. And when you call this, a request should be made to this URL. And the credentials object should be stringified and passed in. So let's take a look. I'm just going to copy this entire paragraph. Go over to the users API, dump this at the bottom, so I have access to it. So it should be the same as add article. Okay, jump back, go to add article, and copy and paste this entire thing. I'm going to dump it right over here. I'm going to just more or less copy this whole thing. So I'm going to put an async in the front, grab this whole thing, cut it, and paste it right over there. So let response equal await fetch to this URL, but it looks like I need to change it to this URL. So I'm just going to copy it. All right, it looks like I'm passing in some JSON. It's going to be a post. I'm going to stringify the credentials object instead of the article object. And if the response is not okay, I'm going to alert. Did you put this in there, right? Okay. Else return true.
So that was for my redirect. So I had two.
Yeah, I might get rid of this one for this one. I might get rid of this block for this particular thing. So let's kind of response. Return response. So let's take a look at what we've got. We've got a login function, which is an asynchronous function. We talked about async versus sync yesterday. So asynchronous, it's the dry cleaner example. You walk up to the dry cleaner, you give them your clothes, and then if you're doing a synchronous call, you just wait there. Imagine that. You're going to drop your clothes in the morning, you're just going to sit at the dry cleaners all day long. That's what's called a synchronous request. You're waiting for something to finish completely before you move on to the next thing. Now, that's highly inefficient because if you were to place an order, on Amazon and you just waited there, like you would just be like your website would just hold there until they finish completing the order. But what they do is they asynchronously say, "You're good to go. We created an order for you, and in the back end, we're gonna actually like, we're actually gonna fill it." Do people watch Family Guy here? Okay. All right, so in Family Guy, do you remember when Stewie goes up to Lois and goes, "Do you just sit here and watch the laundry the entire time?" That's like a synchronous call. So she is literally sitting in front of the laundry machine and just like waiting for the laundry to finish. And nobody will actually do that in real life because it's ridiculous. So that's synchronously waiting for your laundry to finish versus asynchronous, which is I'm going to go to the dry cleaner, I'm going to give them the clothes, they give me a receipt, and I walk away. Something else happens in the background, and at one point it's going to be done. Same thing with the laundry. I put the laundry in, I walk away. At some point in the future, the laundry machine will ring and tell me that it's finished. It can do its stuff in the background. So we're making an asynchronous call, meaning that I'm going to make this call in the background. And at one point, it's going to be finished.
John,
So, yep.
Is async built into JavaScript or is it something?
Async await is built into JavaScript. So we're going to have a response. We're going to await for this to finish. We're going to make a request first to this particular URL. It's just localhost 3001. It's operating in the background. There's a little bit of magic here. But we're going to send over some headers saying, this is what we're sending over. We're sending over some JSON. It's a post request instead of a get request. And the body of what we're sending over is a JSON, a stringified JSON credential object. Once that's finished, I'm going to return the response. So async await basically means that I'm just not going to execute the next line of code until this line is finished. But it's still running in the background. I'm not pausing the entire app for this. Yep.
Would it be here we would validate, or what we do with the credential objects was incorrect? We have some other logic there.
There is, I believe, the API in the background. This takes care of that for you. I think it gives you the response code if it's not correct.
If you were using like Facebook login or Google login, then this would be where you've been using that?
Pretty much, yeah. So you would grab so face.
I don't know.
This is kind of where it would be, but essentially there would be like a little widget that shows up. You know when you go to like, if you go to Airbnb.com and you say like login, and there's that little rectangle that says sign in with Google. At that point, it's actually all Google's like doing.
So this wouldn't even exist.
This wouldn't even exist. Yeah. So okay, let's see if this one works. Let's see. There's a unit test that verifies the expected behavior. If this succeeds, you may proceed to the next section. Okay, let's see it. I'm going to run Npm Run Test, specifically source API users API.test.js. So this is the way that I run one particular test rather than every single test.
Can I ask one more quick question?
Sure. Sure.
So this user's API.js, this file,
Yes.
where you're using articles API, if you had like a Google API login, like a Google login API, I guess,
Yep.
it would just kind of be up in that higher API folder, that one. Wait, it would automatically be there, and then like where it says export default login would come from that API without you doing that.
So these are API calls that we're creating ourselves. So like we know that this particular URL exists, and we're going to be sending over some information. This is something that is like if we're making requests to external services, it generally goes inside the API folder. Google and Facebook and Twitter login is a little bit different because oftentimes there are NPM like modules that will do all of that for you. So underneath the hood, it's probably something like this, but you could also just do like, I think it's like Google OAuth like .login, and that's just a method, but underneath the hood, it's probably something similar to this. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to run these tests. Hopefully they pass. Please. Okay, I saw something. I saw green. I'm happy with that. All right, so we've set it up correctly because we have a test that's found right over here. Basically seeing if you log in correctly, it should work. So if we hooked it up correctly, your test will pass, and I think we're good to move on to the next section. So at this point, we're able to log in, but when valid credentials are sent to this particular endpoint, you're going to get a response that looks something like this. We really want to keep track of this ID number. This is that token that's being sent back from the server. So it says we want to call users API.login from this particular page, but we need to store the response object inside of state. I don't even know what that means. Anybody?
So you want to make the API call from the login page.
Yep.
But you want to store the response in your app state. So the state in your app.
Cool. Why do you think? So that's true. We're going to be calling the user's API from this page, which makes sense. The page that logs in is going to call the API. But why are we storing it inside of app.js's state and not in the login page's state? The next line.
So you can use it and also
Yeah, pretty much. Because your app.js is like the top level. and you need to know whether or not you're logged in for many other portions of your particular application. So just storing it inside of login page isn't terribly useful. You need to store it at the top level to say, like, I'm logged in, thus show me all of these other things. In order to store the user object in app.js state, we need to A, create a class method in app.js that accepts the user object as a parameter and sets it into state, and then B, pass that method into login page.js. All right, so for item A, let's create a method called handle login. It's going to take a user and then set the state equal to user. Okay, so I'm going to grab this whole thing, go to app.js, and then outside of the render function, I'm going to create a handle login. Oh man, oh no, okay, that's fine. I'm going to create a handle login method. The handle login method is going to take in a user and then set the state of this particular state of this component to user, which means that we need one more thing before I do anything else. Any thoughts? Currently, app.js only has a handle login function and a render function, and it has state is equal to user. Create a state, user is equal to nothing to begin with. So app.js, when it first loads up, has state, and it has a user key, and it's equal to nothing. Just equal to nothing, so that we know that we're not logged in right now. Once the handle login fires off, hopefully we'll get back a user, and we're going to overwrite the user from nothing into that user that we received coming back. Yep.
We can use state like that because we're not taking any props in this component. But if we're taking props, we have to use
yeah, we can do both. If you wanted to do, we could do constructor props, and then super props.
But no,
Yeah. So yeah, you could do that. This is happening underneath the hood. This is just a shorthand way of writing code.
When you're taking in props,
When you're taking in props, yeah.
So the state is like an init. The state like an init.
State is not an init. Constructor is the init.
Does the constructor the constructor when you just do the super prop? Is that the same thing as state?
Nope. That's actually the next line that I didn't type. So this got state.
The state's like global variables.
Okay.
You could just define a state like you did on line 19, and then also on a date mount set.
I don't think that's accurate. Because constructor is I believe constructor is its own lifecycle method.
Yes.
So you're saying once you're saying you can have this, and then the answer is probably, but we'll go with the other one.
So I was looking at the React tutorial. It seemed like there's obviously like multiple versions. There's a newer one where it seemed like you don't actually have to have the constructor in there.
Like, yeah, just like this, right? Yeah. So that's why I use this one. It's shorthand for what we had before. It's just fewer lines of code. So I'm saying state is you can think of it like as an instance variable to app.js, and it's just an object of stuff that you might need to keep track of. So right when app is first created, the state has user equal to nothing. I've got this random method that the README provided. And it says we need to pass this method into the login component so that we have, okay. So if we take a look at all of our routes so far, we're not actually passing anything in. We need to pass in the handle login method from app into login page.js. And if you look at everything that we have so far for all of our routes, we're not passing anything in. We're just saying the exact path is going to be, this is the route that you're going to go to, and the component that's going to handle that is some sort of component. So we're not actually passing anything in. I need to pass in handle login into this route, but that's not, unfortunately, not how routes work. So if you need to pass something in, you're gonna need to run something that looks like this. You need to pass in something called render. So instead of just component, which component is handling this, there's a new method called render down here at the bottom. I'll move this up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna move it outside of my return. So what I've done is, remember, you can do any JavaScript that you want between the render and the return. This is just like empty space for JavaScript stuff. Once you hit the return, that's the stuff that's getting returned out to the screen. That's the thing that's going to show up. So line 23, I've got render login page. It's just equal to a constant. So this is a function. It's going to take in the props from app.js. That's something that we get for free, and then we're going to return login page with the history of props.history, so we can keep this particular page knows where we've been so far. It keeps track of all, it's able to update where you're going in the browser as well. And it also has this handle login method that we created right up here. So again, if your route needs to do pretty much anything besides just render, you're going to have, and you want to pass in some sort of props, you're going to have to follow what I'm about to do. So let me just get rid of this render.
I feel like a card stuff.
I would do it there, yep. So all of these aren't doing anything other than rendering the page. So that's why just showing the page. That's why we have the exact path equal to this particular URL. The component that handles it is this particular component. Now, when you take a look at line 40, it's slightly different. I still have the exact path equal to login, but when I render it, I need to render it with certain properties that I'm passing down from app.js into the page itself. So when I render it, I'm going to run the render login page function, which is found up here. So this render login page takes in some props that it steals from app.js, and then it returns the login page with the history and the handle login. Yep.
Is there any specific reason why we're doing it between render and return and not as a method of app.js?
I don't see why not. We can do either one. I was just going to dump them all in here and then refactor later, but we can refactor now.
I feel like that's rendering.
Yeah. Maybe I'll do render login page, and I believe it now has to just be this dot render login page.
Why would you take the function or the method out of the render? You don't need the constant. Like, you don't need to, I feel like you don't need to declare it. When you take it.
I think you still do, because you still need to name it. Otherwise, it's.
So, I always think of using let or const or bar as the parent something.
That's what we were doing earlier. We were doing const that.
Right, so we took it out of the render.
Yep.
You don't need that.
I don't, because it's actually a method now. That's part of the class.
Okay.
Yeah. So when
Yeah.
so just to reiterate that question, when it's within a function, that's good.
Sorry.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was actually why I suggested that. I felt like it's gonna process that variable again and again and again. It's gonna create a variable again and again and again, and not be used until we actually go to the render login page.
Yeah, that's a legitimate thing. So I'll just explain that one more time. So I just took what the curriculum said, and I just dumped it in between render and return. Again, this area between the render and the return is, you can run anything that you want. You can console log anything. You can do any sort of JavaScript calculations. I put it here just to be super simple. And if I wanted to just keep it like this, it would just be render login page. Render login page, we call it because we've created a constant on line 25. It's part of the same method. So the render method has a constant called render login page, which is a fat arrow function. But what Narayan noticed was that, you're kind of creating this creating this function every single time that you re-render the entire when you render the entire app, which is kind of useless. So he wanted to say, why don't we move it outside? So when I put it outside, you'll notice that there's a squiggly line. We don't need this const anymore because it's just another method that's part of app.js. So when I create it as just another method in here, I'm just going to do this dot render login page. Just to reiterate one last time, if you're not passing down any sort of props, you can just do component. If you need to pass in props, you need to do the render with this fancy thing looking up here.
So now will that render login page show up on every page that you go to or not?
It is a route that I'm registering with app.js. So
you haven't set it up yet to show up.
I actually did set it up to show up. Remember, it's just this login page over here, but it's taking in 2 extra things.
So it's not going to be like at the top where it says log in and log out?
Not yet. We haven't set that up yet.
Oh.
Yeah. Right now we're just saying we need to pass in this handle login method into the login page itself. Okay, this is a giant write-up of what I'm about to do. So if we pass in handle login into the login page, let's first find the login page. Login page is right there. Let's split the screen. Make it smaller. Actually, no. So we have the handle login, which is going to set state of user being user. So why don't we comment this out for right now and just say console.log hello. So whenever handle login is fired off from the child component into the parent, it's just going to console log hello for right now. Then we'll console log user, and then we'll actually set the state. So I have access to the handle login. Where do you think that should go? All right, so that's correct. So I'm inside of login page. At what point inside of this code, let me make it a little bit, that's too small. At what point do you think what method should I actually fire this off in? On submit. Right now we're just console logging. So I'm going to prevent default. And how do I actually fire that off? This is a class-based. This props handle login.
No. Where's handle login? Where's the function handle login?
We don't need to because we passed it in.
Okay.
Yeah. So we created an app.js. We passed it down over here. Let's just say we're going to actually throw in this state. Hopefully this works. Let's find out. So if all goes well, I should, whenever I submit the function here, it should say hello to me. So let me just refresh the page. Let me run the server. No, it's not just you. John@email.com, 123123 is my password. Again, if all goes well and I hit the submit button, it'll say hello, please. Nice. Great. So let's chase this from bottom all the way to the top. We've got a form on the login page that says whenever I submit it, it's going to fire this .onSubmit. This refers to loginpage.js. Loginpage.js has an onSubmit function. The onSubmit takes an event. We prevent that from happening because when you press submit on something, it usually redirects you somewhere else. So it's going to say, I'm just saying, don't do that. Prevent your default behavior from happening. Whenever I hit this, it fires off this .props.handle login. So this .props we know is passed in from one component into another. So handle login doesn't exist within login page. It's something that's passed down. App.js, I've got that login page, and I'm passing in this handle login. And then it's just going to console log hello. Let's change this hello to the actual user that's coming back. If I go back into this and I do john@email.com, 123123, clear this, hit submit, I get email and password right over here. Perfect. We're missing one thing. I don't really care about email and password. I care about this giant credential that's coming back. I think oh, whoops. No, we forgot to use the user's API login from the login page. So let's do that first. So let's say let response equal users API login with this state. Then let's just return response. User's API is not defined, makes sense. So I'm going to import user's API from API, user's API. See if this works. So if this works correctly, I'll be surprised, but I'll find out. John@email.com, 123123, submit. 401 unauthorized. That's actually a good thing. So let's try it again with the actual one, which is john@doe.com. And the password is open sesame. Okay, let's try this one more time. Great. Okay, let's find out what response is. Console.log response. And we'll just console log whatever. Okay, so it looks like we are returned a promise, and we need to resolve that promise. All right, so let's chase this down. So we've got the form. Whenever we submit it, it fires off on submit. On submit already has the email and password. I'm passing that into the user's API, and I'm console logging the response, which is a promise. Oh, it looks, I think I forgot one thing. I think it's response.json. Oops. John@doe.com, open sesame, submit. Oh man.
Are we returning immediately before it even comes back, or how does that work? Is it an async function?
Async await.
No, the response.
So we have let response equal the await of this.
So we should.
JSON's an
Oh, no,
async.
it
If JSON's an async function, then shouldn't we have a await?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, get it back on time.
Let's find out if this works. Still a promise. Resolve promise, async await.
Should we even make that handle login maybe? Because it's running right away, then it's still a promise and not result. It's asking to return right after the steps. It's going to run through the test bit before the link comes back again.
I think this might be the answer, but I don't know. Refresh. Go.com. Come on.
Can we see the function that calls that async function?
Right here.
Yeah. So, like they were saying, when you call user API login, it's the asynchronous function. So then console.log response will be ran synchronously.
Like that.
And we'll have to change on
Is it here?
Yes. Thank you.
Do I need to change anything with users API then?
That's it.
Yeah, that's we'll take a break right after this. Oh my god. Yeah, let's take a break.